Darnell Pruitt was 38 years old, and until that Thursday night, he believed two things without question: that his wife of 8 years was the woman she presented herself to be, and that his best friend of 20 years was exactly the brother he claimed to be. Darnell was a logistics coordinator, steady, reliable, the kind of man who showed up for everyone without being asked. His wife Adrienne was a marketing director. His best friend Troy managed his retirement portfolio and had stood beside him at the altar. For 3 weeks, Adrienne had been slipping out of their bed after 2 a.m. and returning before dawn. She offered one explanation and never repeated it. So one night, Darnell stopped sleeping and started watching. He followed her through dark streets to a brick house on Beechwood Drive, a house he had been inside dozens of times. He watched his wife use her own key to walk through his best friend's front door without knocking. And sitting alone in that car, in the dark, Darnell Pruitt made a decision, not in anger, in absolute clarity. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The house was still dark when Darnell opened his eyes at 5:15 a.m., 15 minutes before his alarm. He didn't need it anymore. His body knew when to wake after years of the same routine. The soft hum of the heating system was the only sound as he slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb Adrienne's side, though he knew it was empty. Again. The hardwood floors were cool under his feet as he padded to the kitchen. Every movement was precise, practiced. He filled the coffee maker with the exact amount of water needed for 2 cups, though he knew he'd end up drinking both. Adrienne hadn't shared morning coffee with him in weeks. While the coffee brewed, he stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the empty driveway where Adrienne's car should be. The streetlights cast orange pools on the asphalt, and the neighbor's newspaper lay untouched in their dewy lawn. Everything was exactly as it should be, except for the space where his wife's car belonged. The coffee maker beeped softly. Darnell poured his first cup, adding nothing to it. Black coffee had been his father's way, and it had become his too. The thought of his father brought a slight smile. Walter Pruitt had worked 2 jobs for 20 years without complaint, showing up every day with the same quiet strength Darnell had inherited. He carried his coffee to the bedroom to begin his morning routine. The closet door opened silently on well-oiled hinges. He'd fixed that squeak himself last month, like he fixed everything that needed attention. His shirts hung in a neat row, organized by color. He selected a blue one, already pressed. The matching tie was exactly where it belonged. As he dressed, Darnell caught his reflection in the mirror. At 38, he looked solid, dependable. The kind of man people counted on. The kind of man who showed up early to help set up and stayed late to clean up. The kind of man who remembered birthdays and anniversary dates, who kept track of when the furnace needed maintenance and when to rotate the tires. The kind of man whose wife now left their bed in the middle of the night. The first time it happened, 3 weeks ago, he'd accepted her explanation about the panic attack. It made sense. She'd been under pressure at work, launching a new marketing campaign. But then it happened again 4 days later, and again the week after that. Each time, the same pattern. Sometime between 2 and 2:15 a.m., the soft click of their bedroom door, the distant sound of her car starting, the empty space beside him growing cold. Darnell packed his work bag methodically. Laptop, planner, protein bar for his mid-morning break. Everything in its place. Everything accounted for. Just like the numbers he managed at work, tracking inventory and shipping routes across 3 states. His mind worked in systems and patterns, and this pattern, these pre-dawn disappearances, was becoming impossible to ignore. He heard the familiar sound of Adrienne's car pulling into the driveway. 4:47 a.m. The engine shut off. A car door closed softly. He stood perfectly still, listening to her key in the front door, her careful footsteps on the stairs. When she eased the bedroom door open, he kept his breathing steady and deep, maintaining the appearance of sleep. The bed dipped slightly as she slipped under the covers. She smelled of the cold morning air and something else, something that didn't belong in their bedroom at 4:47 a.m. She settled in, facing away from him, and within minutes, her breathing fell into the rhythm of sleep. Darnell lay there, eyes open in the dark, watching the ceiling as the first hints of dawn began to soften the darkness outside their window. His mind moved through the facts like inventory. 3 weeks, multiple disappearances, always the same time window, always the same careful return before dawn. No more explanations offered, no conversations initiated, just silence and distance and the growing space between them in a bed they'd shared for 8 years. The ceiling had a small water stain in the corner, something else he needed to fix. But first, he needed to address this. Not with accusations or confrontations, not with questions she would deflect or emotions she would redirect. No, he would handle this the way he handled everything, methodically, thoroughly, with patience and precision. As the room slowly brightened with approaching daylight, Darnell made his decision. The next time Adrienne slipped out of their bed in the dark hours, he would follow. He would see for himself where these pre-dawn drives led. Then he would know exactly what he was dealing with, and he could plan his next steps accordingly. Darnell lay motionless in bed, his breathing carefully regulated to mimic sleep. The digital clock on his nightstand cast a faint red glow. 1:57 a.m. He'd been awake for hours, waiting. The house was silent except for the soft hum of the central heating and the distant tick of the kitchen clock he'd fixed last summer. At 2:08 a.m. he felt Adrienne stir beside him. She moved with deliberate care, each motion practiced and precise. The mattress shifted as she sat up slowly. He kept his breathing deep and steady as she paused, listening. He could feel her eyes on him, checking for any sign of wakefulness. Satisfied he was asleep, Adrienne eased out of bed. Her feet touched the floor without a sound. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, the screen's brief glow illuminating her face for a moment before she turned it face down. Her silhouette moved through their bedroom with the confidence of someone who had made this journey many times before. The bedroom door opened with the barest whisper of sound. Adrienne had learned exactly how to pull it to avoid the slight creak in the top hinge. Darnell listened to her soft footsteps on the stairs, counting them. 13 steps down. A pause at the bottom. The familiar electronic chirp of their security system being disarmed. He gave her exactly 4 minutes, time enough to get to her car and pull away. Then he rose, already fully dressed under the covers. His shoes waited by the bed, chosen specifically because they made no noise on the hardwood floors. Outside, the February air bit through his jacket. His car was parked on the street instead of the driveway, positioned for a quick and quiet departure. He could see Adrienne's taillights disappearing around the corner at the end of their street. Darnell followed at a careful distance, keeping 2 car lengths between them. The streets were empty at this hour, making it harder to stay hidden. He killed his headlights for a full block before catching himself, the instinct to hide already telling him what his conscious mind was still processing. Adrienne drove with purpose, making turns without hesitation. This was not an aimless drive to clear her head. This was a route she knew well. When she turned north onto Clement Avenue, something in Darnell's chest tightened. He knew these streets. He knew exactly where they led. The brick colonial appeared ahead, its familiar outline dark against the star-scattered sky. How many times had he parked in that driveway? How many Sunday afternoons had he spent in that backyard, watching games on the projected screen while Troy worked the grill? Adrienne pulled up to the curb in front of Troy Weber's house. Darnell parked across the street, half a block back, and watched as she got out of her car. She didn't look around, didn't check for observers. She moved with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before, who felt completely secure in her routine. In the dim glow of the streetlight, he could see her clearly as she approached Troy's front door. She didn't knock. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a key. Her key to Troy's house. The door opened and closed without a sound. A light was on in the downstairs front room, the room where they'd watched the Super Bowl 4 months ago, where Troy had poured him bourbon and called him brother. 90 seconds after Adrienne entered, the light went out. Darnell sat in his car, perfectly still. He took out his phone and began documenting photos of Adrienne's car at the curb, Troy's truck in the driveway, the house itself. Each image automatically time-stamped. 2:37 a.m., 2:38 a.m., 2:39 a.m. For 11 minutes, he remained there, letting the reality settle into his bones. His best friend since freshman year at Grambling State, the man who had stood beside him at his wedding, the financial advisor who managed his retirement portfolio and handled investments for half their friend circle, and his wife. Together in that dark house at 2:40 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, the drive home was a blur of empty streets and yellow traffic lights. Darnell moved through his house without turning on any lights, his feet carrying him to the kitchen table. He sat there in the dark, not moving, barely breathing. Hours passed as his mind worked through the implications, the timeline, the necessary steps that would follow. As the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the kitchen windows, Darnell closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, they were clear and focused. He would not shout, would not confront, would not give them the satisfaction of an emotional response they could manage or manipulate. No, he would move forward exactly as he did everything else, with careful planning, thorough documentation, and precise execution, on his own terms, in his own time. The alarm buzzed at 5:15 a.m., but Darnell was already awake. He'd managed perhaps 90 minutes of sleep, drifting off briefly around 4 a.m. It didn't matter. His mind was clear, focused on the sequence of necessary steps ahead of him. He showered and dressed with mechanical precision, selecting a charcoal gray suit he knew Adrienne particularly liked. The familiar ritual of knotting his tie brought an odd comfort. One more normal thing on a morning that would never be normal again. The sky was still dark when he pulled into the FedEx office parking lot. He'd chosen the location carefully. 3 miles from home, far enough that he wouldn't run into anyone they knew. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed as he connected his phone to their system. The night shift worker barely glanced up from his phone as Darnell methodically printed each photograph. The images emerged from the printer with stark clarity. Adrienne's car at the curb, Troy's truck in the driveway, the house itself, familiar even in shadow. Each timestamp glowed in the corner. 2:37 a.m., 2:38 a.m., 2:39 a.m. Proof, rendered in pixels and paper, of a betrayal he couldn't unknow. He paid in cash, declined the receipt, and slipped the photos into a manila folder he'd brought from home. The folder disappeared into his work bag, secured with a combination lock he'd bought 6 months ago and never used until now. The whole process took less than 20 minutes. When he returned home, he could hear the shower running upstairs. Adrienne's morning routine, as predictable as the sunrise. He had at least 15 minutes before she'd emerge. Sitting at the kitchen table, he opened his laptop and navigated to their online banking portal. The joint accounts appeared normal at first glance. Regular deposits, standard bills, the usual ebb and flow of a shared financial life. But Darnell hadn't spent 15 years in logistics without learning to spot patterns. He started with the last 3 months, then expanded to 6, then 12, then 19. The pattern emerged like a photograph developing in darkroom chemicals. Small transfers, never more than a few $100s at a time. spaced irregularly enough to avoid any obvious rhythm. Each one tagged with mundane descriptions: household expenses, personal care, miscellaneous, the kind of transactions that blended into the background of a busy life. But when he followed them, they led to an account he'd never seen before. An account registered under a name he hadn't heard in 8 years: Adrienne Hollis. His fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up transaction histories. The numbers assembled themselves into a clear picture. $14,327, transferred in careful increments over 19 months. The account itself had been opened 22 months ago, well before he'd noticed any change in their marriage, long before he'd woken to find her side of the bed empty. This wasn't crisis management. This wasn't impulse. This was architecture, carefully constructed over nearly 2 years. While she was still kissing him goodbye in the mornings, while she was still planning their anniversary dinner, while she was still calling him at lunch just to check in, she had been building herself an exit, brick by financial brick. The shower stopped running upstairs. Darnell closed the laptop without changing his expression. He stood, straightened his tie, and gathered his work bag. Adrienne appeared in the kitchen doorway, wrapped in her robe, hair still damp. "You're leaving early," she said, surprise coloring her voice. "Early meeting," he replied, his voice steady. "Might not be back till late." The drive to his parents' house was automatic, his hands knowing the turns without conscious thought. Walter was already on the back porch, as if he'd been expecting his son. He didn't ask questions when Darnell sat heavily in the chair beside him, didn't push for explanation. He simply disappeared into the house and returned with 2 cups of coffee, steam rising in the cool morning air. For 45 minutes, they sat in silence. Walter sipped his coffee and watched the birds at the feeder he'd hung last spring. Darnell let the quiet wrap around him like armor, preparing for what came next. That afternoon, he sat across from attorney Phoebe Grant, the manila folder centered on her desk like a bomb waiting to detonate. She listened without interruption as he laid out the evidence: the photographs, the bank statements, the hidden account. Her face remained professionally neutral, but her eyes sharpened with each new detail. "What do you need from me?" she asked when he finished. "Everything," Darnell replied. "I need to know exactly what to document and how to protect myself. And then I need you to file for divorce." The sun was setting when he pulled into his driveway that evening. Through the kitchen window, he could see Adrienne moving around, preparing dinner. Steam rose from a pot on the stove. The scene was so normal, it felt surreal. He walked inside, set down his bag, and washed his hands at the kitchen sink. The water was warm against his skin as he watched soap bubbles swirl down the drain. "How was your day?" Adrienne asked, stirring something that smelled like the marinara sauce she'd learned from his mother. "Fine," Darnell said, sitting down at the table. He meant it differently than she understood it. The morning light filtered through Phoebe Grant's office windows as Darnell reviewed the initial divorce paperwork. Each signature felt weightier than the last, like stepping stones across a river he couldn't return from. "Before we proceed further," Phoebe said, gathering the signed documents, "I want you to meet someone." She pressed her intercom. "Send in Mr. Okafor, please." Gerald Okafor entered with quiet efficiency, carrying a leather portfolio and a tablet. His pressed shirt and wire-rimmed glasses gave him the precise appearance of someone who spoke fluently in numbers. "Mr. Pruitt," Gerald said, extending his hand. "I'm a forensic accountant. Attorney Grant brings me in when financial concealment might be involved. From what she's described, we need to look deeper at your situation." Darnell nodded, recognizing the same professional focus he brought to his own work. "Where do we start?" "I'll need full access to all financial records," Gerald explained, opening his portfolio. "Bank statements, investment accounts, credit cards, property documents, especially that home equity line. The more complete the picture, the better we can track any irregularities." They spent the next hour transferring access credentials and signing additional authorizations. Gerald's questions were precise, targeted. He didn't waste words or emotion, just gathered data points like a surgeon mapping incision sites. 3 days later, Gerald's preliminary findings landed in Darnell's email with the weight of a sledgehammer. Sitting at his kitchen table after midnight, long after Adrienne had gone to bed, Darnell opened the attached PDF. The first section detailed Adrienne's manipulation of their home equity line of credit. Gerald had traced 19 months of systematic withdrawals, never large enough to trigger alerts, always documented with plausible domestic expenses. The total made Darnell's chest tight. $31,000 extracted from their home's value, while she slept beside him every night. Gerald's analysis was clinical. Pattern indicates deliberate structuring of transactions to avoid detection thresholds. Consistent spacing and amount variation suggests ongoing planning rather than situational response. Subject maintained detailed documentation of false expenses to support withdrawals. The familiar ache of betrayal twisted sharper. This wasn't just about the money, it was about the sustained deception required to move it. Every transaction represented a moment when Adrienne chose to lie, chose to steal, chose to undermine their shared future while maintaining the performance of building it. But it was the second section of Gerald's report that made Darnell push back from the table, needing physical distance from the words on his screen. Review of retirement portfolio managed by Troy Weber reveals consistent pattern of unauthorized trading activity and fee misrepresentation, Gerald wrote. Multiple instances of trades executed outside stated risk parameters. Management fees charged without corresponding service documentation. Commission structure suggests prioritization of firm revenue over client benefit. The report detailed 6 years of subtle financial predation. Troy had used his discretionary authority, granted by Darnell's complete trust, to generate commission income through unnecessary trades while charging fees for services never actually provided. Gerald's language remained precise. Analysis indicates systematic exploitation of account authority for personal financial benefit. Pattern extends across full period of portfolio management. Darnell sat in the dark kitchen, the blue light of his laptop screen the only illumination. The house felt different now, knowing what he knew. Every surface held memories he had to rewrite. Troy at this table during Sunday dinners, Adrienne managing their bills at that counter, both of them building separate betrayals while he maintained the infrastructure of their shared lives. The scope of it settled over him like heavy wool, not just the money taken, but the sustained calculation required to take it. They had looked him in the eye for years, accepted his trust, and deliberately weaponized it against him. Troy had used their friendship to access his retirement savings. Adrienne had used their marriage to hollow out their home's equity. Both of them had counted on his reliability, his steadiness, his fundamental decency to keep him from looking too closely. The kitchen clock ticked past 1 a.m. Somewhere upstairs, Adrienne slept in their bed, probably assuming he was working late on logistics reports. The simple predictability of his habits had made their deceptions possible. They had built their separate escapes on the foundation of who he was, the reliable one, the steady one, the one who could be counted on not to ask uncomfortable questions. Darnell closed the laptop, sitting motionless in the darkness. He listened to the house settle around him, absorbing the full architecture of what had been done to him, not by strangers or distant criminals, but by his wife and his best friend. The two people he had trusted without reservation or question. He sat there for a long time before finally climbing the stairs to bed. Darnell's phone lit up with Troy's name 2 days after Gerald's report landed. He watched it ring twice before answering with practiced ease. "Hey, brother. What's good?" Troy's voice carried its usual warmth through the speaker. "Just finishing up some inventory reports," Darnell replied, his tone calibrated to match Troy's casualness. "What's up?" "Man, I'm looking at having lunch at Giovanni's. Been thinking about that chicken marsala. You free today? Darnell glanced at Gerald's report sitting in his desk drawer. Yeah, I can do that. Usual time. Perfect. See you at 12:30. Giovanni's was their regular spot. White tablecloths, good bread, waiters who recognized them. Troy was already seated when Darnell arrived, standing to embrace him with the easy familiarity of 20 years' friendship. Darnell returned the hug, noting how the gesture felt hollow now, like watching an actor perform intimacy on stage. Already ordered your iced tea, Troy said, gesturing to the glass as Darnell sat. You know they never bring enough lemon. Darnell nodded, watching Troy's hands as he arranged his napkin, the same hands that had executed unauthorized trades in his retirement account for 6 years. Thanks. How's business? Actually, that's part of why I wanted to catch up. Troy leaned forward, his enthusiasm practiced and precise. There's this new investment vehicle I've been researching. Clean energy infrastructure bonds. The tax advantages alone make it worth looking at, but the projected returns— He whistled low. I thought of you first. Darnell took a slow sip of tea, letting Troy elaborate. Each word landed differently now. Not as friendly advice, but as potential evidence. He asked questions that sounded like interest but were really documentation. What's the minimum buy-in? How long is the lockup period? Who's managing the fund? Troy answered each question with professional fluency, periodically touching Darnell's arm for emphasis. Remember when we used to think being rich meant having enough for pizza every night? He laughed. Now look at us, brother. 20 years from those broke college days, and you're one of my most successful clients. The word client carried new weight. Darnell thought of Gerald's preliminary findings, the pattern of fees, the unauthorized trades, the careful exploitation of trust. He watched Troy break off a piece of bread and remembered other meals at this same table, other conversations where Troy had called him brother while systematically bleeding his account. Remember that economics professor? Troy continued, grinning. What was his name? Davidson? Used to say we'd never make it in finance because we weren't born into it? He shook his head. Man, I wish he could see us now. Darnell smiled, noting how Troy consistently wove their shared history into his pitches. It wasn't random nostalgia. It was technique. Yeah, Davidson. He wasn't wrong about everything, though. Markets still mostly old money. That's why we have to be smarter. Troy tapped the table for emphasis. Which brings me back to these infrastructure bonds. The prospectus just came across my desk yesterday. I can have the paperwork ready by Friday if you want in early. The waiter arrived with their entrees. Chicken marsala for Troy, grilled salmon for Darnell. They ate with the comfortable rhythm of long association, Troy steering the conversation through college memories, mutual friends, and carefully placed references to his firm's recent successes. When the check arrived, Darnell reached for it before Troy could protest. I got this one. Always trying to take care of people, Troy said, his smile warm and practiced. That's why you're family, brother. Darnell signed the receipt, calculating how many meals he had paid for, while Troy was charging him fees for services never rendered. The math wasn't about money anymore. It was about audacity. In his car, Darnell pulled up Gerald's number. The call connected on the second ring. Mr. Okafor, I need you to extend the account review back 6 years. Full analysis. He paused, then added, and I want a specific section examining accounts belonging to clients referred through my personal network. Anyone I connected to Weber Wealth Group, family, colleagues, friends, look for the same patterns you found in my portfolio. Gerald's response was immediate and professional. I'll need names and approximate dates of referral. I'll email you a list within the hour. Darnell merged onto the highway. How long for the expanded report? Given the scope, 3 to 4 days for preliminary findings. Good. Thank you. Darnell ended the call and drove toward his office in complete silence. The quiet wasn't grief or shock anymore. It was the focused stillness of a man assembling pieces of a much larger picture. Each mile brought him closer to his desk, his files, and the list of names he needed to send Gerald. People who had trusted Troy because they trusted him first. Darnell pulled into his parents' driveway at precisely 5:30 p.m., the same way he had every Sunday for 11 years. The house stood familiar and solid. Red brick, white trim, the flower boxes his father Walter maintained with quiet pride. Inside, the scent of his mother's cooking filled the kitchen. Pot roast, rosemary potatoes, green beans with almonds. Loretta Pruitt was at the counter, dish towel in hand, when Darnell entered. He watched her for a moment. The precise movements, the careful attention to detail that had shaped his own approach to life. Before he could help with dinner preparations, as he usually did, a question rose in his throat. Unexpected, but necessary. "Mom, when did you first know something was wrong with Adrienne?" Loretta's hands stilled. She set the dish towel down deliberately and turned to face her son. Her eyes, sharp, clear, unsentimental, met his directly. "I knew at the engagement party." The words landed with the weight of long-held certainty. Darnell pulled out a kitchen chair and sat, waiting. His mother had always chosen her words carefully, and he knew there was more coming. "You'll remember that evening. We had it here in the backyard." Loretta moved to sit across from him. "I watched her all night. The way she talked about you to her friends." She paused. "She never said anything unkind. That wasn't it. But she talked about you like you were a category. My fiancé. My future husband. Never Darnell. Never you as yourself." Darnell remembered the party. White lights in the trees, champagne glasses catching the sunset. He had been so focused on making sure everything was perfect that he hadn't noticed how Adrienne moved through the space. "For 8 years I watched," Loretta continued. "Every gathering, every holiday. The way she lit up differently around certain men. Not because they were attractive, but because they represented something. Status, money, position." She folded her hands on the table. The way she talked about finances was always hungry. Not about building something together. About access. "Why didn't you say anything?" Darnell's voice was quiet. "Because you're a grown man who made his choice." Loretta's tone held no apology. "I raised you to think for yourself. I respected that. But you asked me when I knew, and I'm telling you now. I knew before you said, 'I do.'" Through the kitchen window, Darnell could see his father in the backyard, tending to the tomato plants with methodical care. The same way he'd watched Walter work 2 jobs without complaint, maintain their home without fanfare, love their family without performance. "There's something else," Loretta said after a moment. "I never trusted Troy either." Darnell's attention sharpened. "What do you mean?" "At your wedding. During the ceremony." Loretta's eyes were clear and direct. "I saw how he watched her. Not like a best man watching his friend get married. Like a man measuring something he wanted." The weight of this observation settled alongside the hotel receipt Phoebe's team had uncovered. Charged to Troy's business account 3 years and 3 months ago, during a weekend Darnell had been in Atlanta for a logistics conference. The phone records confirmed it. Calls, texts, a pattern that started that same weekend and never stopped. 3 years and 3 months. Every memory from that period reconstructed itself with brutal clarity. The Christmas where Troy brought an expensive bottle of wine and sat at their table telling stories about college. The anniversary dinner where Adrienne wore a new dress, and Troy happened to stop by the restaurant to say hello. Sunday dinners, birthday celebrations, casual weeknight visits, all of it existed in 2 versions now. What Darnell thought he was living, and what was actually happening while he lived it. "You always saw more than you said," Darnell observed quietly. "Teachers learn to watch," Loretta replied. 30 years in classrooms, you learn to see what people think they're hiding. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. You are your father's son. That has always been the best thing about you. The drive home after dinner was silent. Darnell kept both hands on the wheel, processing the revised timeline of his marriage. This wasn't a recent development, a moment of weakness, a temporary lapse. This was a chosen, sustained parallel life, maintained for over 3 years, while he fixed things around the house, managed their finances, and believed in the marriage he thought he was in. His headlights swept across the driveway as he pulled in. He sat in the car briefly, looking at the house, the porch light he'd installed himself, the window boxes he replanted every spring, the life he'd built with steady hands, while something else was being built in the shadows behind it. Then he went inside. The secure email from Gerald Okafor arrived at 7:43 a.m. Monday morning. Darnell closed his office door, settled into his chair, and opened the 14-page document with the same steady hands that had carried him through the past 6 weeks of discovery. The report was exhaustive, written in the precise language of regulatory compliance. Gerald had organized it by category: unauthorized trading activity, fee misrepresentation, risk profile violations. Each section contained dates, amounts, and specific citations of which regulations had been breached. The documentation was thorough enough to make argument impossible. Darnell read about trades executed in his account that exceeded his stated risk tolerance, moves that generated higher commissions for Troy, while exposing Darnell's retirement funds to volatility he had specifically declined to accept. He saw management fees charged for services never rendered, structured in amounts just small enough to avoid immediate attention. Then he reached the section he had specifically requested: the review of accounts belonging to clients referred through his personal network. The pattern repeated with mechanical precision in 2 additional portfolios, one belonging to Marcus, his cousin who coached high school basketball, and one belonging to James, a former colleague from his first logistics job. Both had trusted Troy because Darnell vouched for him. Both had their accounts handled the same way. The numbers told a story larger than a simple betrayal. Troy hadn't just violated their friendship, he had weaponized it. He had used Darnell's reputation, his relationships, the trust people placed in his judgment, as a tool to access other victims. The personal and the professional collapsed into a single narrative of exploitation. Darnell picked up his phone and called Corey Miles. "Need a favor," he said when Corey answered. "Discreet one. Name it." Corey's voice was steady, professional. "I need you to reach out to Marcus and James. Casual contact. Ask if they've reviewed their investment accounts lately, if they've noticed any unusual fees or trading activity." Darnell kept his tone neutral. "Don't mention Troy directly. Just listen to what they say. When do you need this?" "As soon as you can manage it quietly. Give me 48 hours. Darnell hung up and returned to the report. Gerald had formatted it specifically for regulatory board submission. Proper headings, citation formatting, the kind of technical architecture that turned suspicion into actionable evidence. The board would not need to investigate further. Gerald had already built the case. 2 days later, Corey called back. "Both confirmed," he said without preamble. Marcus noticed some fees he couldn't explain, but figured it was normal market stuff. James had questions about some trades, but said Troy always had a good explanation when he asked. "Appreciate it," Darnell replied. "You need anything else?" "No." This was enough. That afternoon, Darnell sat across from Phoebe Grant as she walked him through the final divorce petition and asset protection restructuring. His individual accounts had been separated, beneficiary designations changed, insurance policies updated. The documentation of Adrienne's hidden account and the diverted home equity funds was attached as evidence. "The regulatory report," Phoebe said, tapping Gerald's document. "When do you want to submit it?" Darnell considered this carefully. The night before Sunday dinner. I want it filed, but I want him walking in not knowing it's done. Phoebe nodded, understanding exactly what this meant. I'll have Gerald submit it Saturday evening then. The board will receive it first thing Monday morning. Back at his desk, Darnell reviewed everything one final time. The report proving financial fraud. The divorce petition documenting Adrienne's hidden accounts. The evidence of a 3-year affair conducted partly on Troy's business account. All of it assembled with the same methodical precision he brought to supply chain management, identifying breaks in the system, documenting the failure points, preparing for controlled demolition. At 6:15 p.m., he picked up his phone and composed a single text. He sent it simultaneously to 2 numbers. Need to talk. Sunday. Come to the house for dinner. Both of you. Adrienne replied first. Of course. Everything okay? Troy's response came 3 minutes later. Count me in, brother. Want me to bring wine? Darnell set the phone face down on his desk without responding to either message. He gathered his things, turned off his office light, and drove home in the gathering dark. For the first time since he had followed Adrienne's car down quiet streets in the pre-dawn hours, he slept through the night without waking. The afternoon light slanted through the dining room windows as Darnell adjusted the 5th place setting. The familiar weight of Sunday dinner, plates his mother had helped them choose when they first bought the house, glasses that had seen 8 years of celebrations, felt different now. Each item was precisely arranged, the table a study in careful preparation. The manila folder rested in the chair beside him, out of sight but present, like a weapon held in reserve. In the kitchen, Adrienne moved with the particular energy of contained anxiety. She had been watching him all day, waiting for the conversation she assumed was coming, growing incrementally more tense as the hours passed without discussion. She stirred pots with too much attention, checked the oven more often than necessary, wiped already clean counters. The performance of domestic care had an edge of desperation to it now. Need any help? Darnell asked, his voice neutral. No, I've got it, she answered quickly. Too quickly. Everything's almost ready. The doorbell rang at 5:47. His parents arrived together as they always did, Walter carrying the same covered dish Loretta had brought to Sunday dinner for 11 years. Darnell hugged them both, noting how his mother's eyes swept the room with quiet assessment, while his father simply squeezed his shoulder a moment longer than usual. At 6:03, Troy's car pulled into the driveway. He entered with practiced ease, bottle of wine in hand, wearing the warm smile that had opened doors and built trust for 2 decades. "Brother!" he called, moving to embrace Darnell. Darnell accepted the hug with perfect composure. He watched Loretta's barely perceptible stiffening as Troy greeted her, noted Walter's minimal nod of acknowledgement. The temperature in the room shifted subtly. They settled around the table, Darnell at the head, Adrienne to his right, Troy beside her, his parents completing the circle. The first portion of dinner unfolded with deliberate ordinariness. Walter commented on the Cowboys' defensive line. Loretta asked about church. Troy poured wine and told a story about a client meeting that was carefully crafted to sound both important and casual. Adrienne laughed at appropriate moments, her tension vibrating just beneath the surface. She touched Troy's arm while passing the bread basket, a gesture so automatic she didn't realize she was doing it. Darnell watched the movement without expression. When the main course was half finished, Darnell set down his fork. The small sound seemed to fill the room. He reached beside him and placed the manila folder at the center of the table, between the salt shaker and Loretta's casserole dish. "I'd like to say some things," he said quietly. "I'd like to say them completely, before anyone responds." The silence that followed was immediate and absolute. He opened the folder. 3 weeks ago, I followed Adrienne when she left the house at 2:13 a.m. I watched her park in front of Troy's house. I watched her use her own key to enter. I took photographs. Her car, Troy's truck, the house, all time-stamped. His voice remained steady. I have similar photographs from 2 other nights. The pattern was consistent. Adrienne's hand tightened around her wine glass. Troy's easy smile flickered but held. The hidden account under your maiden name, Adrienne, opened 22 months ago. $14,000 transferred in small amounts. The $31,000 redirected from our home equity line. All documented. He turned to Troy, maintaining the same measured tone. The unauthorized trading in my retirement account. The fabricated management fees. The risk profile violations. All documented in Gerald Okafor's 14-page report, which details exactly which regulations were breached and when. He paused. And then there's Marcus and James. Same pattern, same unauthorized fees, same out-of-profile trades. 2 people who trusted you because I told them they could. Adrienne spoke first. Darnell, it's complicated. You don't understand. I've been unhappy. Don't. The single word was quiet, but final. Troy leaned forward. Brother, listen. 20 years of friendship. Everything we've been through. You know me. The silence that followed those words seemed to expand until it filled every corner of the room. Darnell let it stretch, let it settle, let it carry the full weight of its own irony. When he spoke again, his voice remained perfectly level. The divorce petition was filed Thursday. The assets are restructured. The equity discrepancy has been reported to our lender as potential fraud. Gerald's report was submitted to the State Regulatory Board Saturday evening. Marcus and James have been contacted. He picked up his fork and returned to his meal. Troy stood slowly, his charm finally deserting him. He looked around the table, searching for an ally, finding none. Loretta met his eyes with a single, sustained look that contained 8 years of quiet observation and perfectly controlled judgment. Then she returned to her plate without another word. Walter reached for his glass, refilled it with deliberate calm, and continued eating. Monday morning arrived with the same pre-dawn quiet. Darnell's alarm went off at 5:15 a.m., though he was already awake. He made coffee in the kitchen where, 12 hours earlier, everything had finally been spoken aloud. The house felt different. Not empty exactly, but stripped of pretense. Like a stage after the performance ends, all the props revealed for what they really were. He drove to work, the folder of documentation now safely filed with Phoebe. The machinery he'd set in motion didn't need his hand on it anymore. It would run with the precise efficiency of systems doing exactly what they were designed to do. The first regulatory notice arrived at Weber Wealth Group 3 weeks later. Troy's license suspension was immediate, pending full investigation. Gerald's report had been thorough enough that the investigators didn't need to dig. The documentation was already organized, annotated, and cross-referenced. The notice was public record, posted on the Regulatory Board's website, where any potential client could find it. Weber Wealth Group began to unravel with shocking speed. The firm had been built entirely on personal relationships, on Troy's carefully cultivated image of trustworthiness, on referrals from people like Darnell, who vouched for him without reservation. When that foundation cracked, everything built on top of it started sliding. Clients called asking questions about their own accounts. Professional contacts stopped returning messages. The referral clients, Marcus and James among them, filed formal recovery claims through the regulatory process. Each claim triggered new documentation requirements, new legal fees, new hours Troy's attorneys had to bill while his income had stopped completely. Adrienne, who had moved into a short-term rental the day after Sunday dinner, watched Troy's professional collapse with increasing clarity. The man she had reimagined as an upgrade, as sophisticated financial security personified, was revealed as something else entirely. Without the license, without the income, without the social gravity of being Darnell's trusted friend, Troy became exactly what he had always been, a man who built things on other people's trust and called it achievement. She didn't stay. There was nothing left to stay for. The divorce proceedings moved with the same efficiency as the regulatory investigation. Phoebe's documentation was bulletproof. Every hidden transfer, every equity redirection, every attempt at financial concealment captured in pristine detail. Adrienne's attorney reviewed the evidence and advised her plainly. Contesting would only increase legal fees without changing the outcome. The settlement reflected exactly what Gerald's forensic accounting revealed. Not what Adrienne had planned for, not what she believed she deserved, but what she had actually contributed versus what she had redirected. The numbers were clean, clinical, and final. She moved into her mother Diane's house, a woman who had spent decades measuring worth by income brackets and social presentation. Living under Diane's roof again, watching her mother's barely concealed disappointment, was its own specific form of consequence. 8 years of carefully constructed distance from her origins collapsed by her own choices. Darnell made no announcements. He posted nothing online. He simply continued showing up, at work, at his parents' house on Sundays, at the community organizations where he had quietly volunteered for years. The story moved through their shared circles the way truth always does, through natural channels, without embellishment, because the facts needed no decoration to land with full force. The social world they had built together, or rather, the world Darnell had built and Adrienne had inhabited, did not split down the middle. It was his relationships, his family, his reputation for showing up consistently for a decade that had created their community. When everything was revealed, that community recognized exactly whose integrity had earned their trust. Neither Troy nor Adrienne found much comfort there. 6 weeks after the settlement was finalized, Darnell sat alone in his living room. The house was entirely his now, legally, financially, completely. For the first time since discovery, since documentation, since execution, he allowed himself to feel the full human weight of what was lost. Not the strategy of it, not the satisfaction of consequence delivered, just the simple, brutal fact of 8 years invested in something that was never what he believed it was. The quiet dignity of his love for Adrienne. The 20 years of brotherhood he thought he had with Troy. The future he had planned to build, now revealed as a foundation made of sand. He sat with it completely, without protection, without the shield of strategy or the comfort of justified anger. Just a man in an empty house, feeling the exact size of what was taken from him. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. He remained in his chair, letting each wave of grief arrive without resistance. The morning light filtered through kitchen windows that had been cleaned just yesterday. Darnell moved through his Saturday routine with the unhurried ease of a man truly at home in his space. The coffee maker, a simple pour-over setup he'd bought 6 months ago, sat ready on the counter. No complicated machinery, no preset timers, just the precise ritual of hot water over fresh grounds. Jazz played softly from the speaker in the corner. John Coltrane this morning, because that's what he felt like hearing. The kitchen itself looked different now. He'd repainted the walls a warm gray last spring, covered the accent wall Adrienne had done in that deep green she'd been so certain about. The new color was lighter, cleaner somehow. He'd done it one Sunday afternoon with no particular ceremony, just opened the windows, laid down drop cloths, and transformed the space into something that belonged entirely to him. The promotion to regional director had come 14 months after the divorce finalized. He hadn't pursued it immediately. There had been too much noise in his head, too many pieces to put back together first. But once the dust settled, once he could think clearly about what he actually wanted rather than what he was trying to protect, he'd put together the application package and presented it with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else. His new financial advisor, recommended by Gerald, managed his considerably healthier portfolio with transparent documentation and clearly explained strategies. Darnell reviewed every contract now, every agreement, every terms of service, not from paranoia, from the earned wisdom that trust should always be verified. The house was his free and clear. The equity line had been closed and settled. His retirement accounts had recovered and grown under more careful management. The kitchen cabinets had been reorganized to his preferences. Coffee supplies within easy reach, plates where they made sense to him, nothing arranged according to someone else's logic. The refrigerator held exactly what he chose to put there. Simple things, but they mattered. They were coordinates on the map of a life reclaimed. He picked up his phone and called his father. Walter answered on the second ring, and they talked easily about nothing in particular. The weather, a minor repair Walter was planning for the deck, whether the Falcons had any real shot this season. The conversation wasn't long, but it didn't need to be. It was the comfortable exchange of two men who had always understood each other. A text from Corey came through as he ended the call, confirming plans for next weekend's game. They'd been doing this more regularly now, not just basketball, but dinner sometimes, conversations about work and life that felt genuine rather than performative. Corey had earned his trust by showing up consistently, by being exactly who he appeared to be. Darnell walked out to the garage, coffee in hand, and looked at the storage shelf he'd been meaning to reinforce. The bracket had worked loose months ago. Nothing urgent, just the kind of small repair that needed doing eventually. He set down his cup, found his tools, and fixed it properly. Not because anyone had asked, not because it couldn't wait, but because he wanted to, because this was his house, and he took care of what belonged to him. Later that afternoon, he drove to his parents' house for Sunday dinner. No confrontations waited there now, no carefully orchestrated revelations, just his mother's cooking, his father's quiet presence at the head of the table, and the particular comfort of being with people who had known him his entire life and loved him without qualification. "The new project going all right?" Loretta asked as she passed him the potatoes. She meant the expansion his team was coordinating. 6 new distribution centers across 3 states. "On schedule so far," he said, and found himself smiling slightly. "Team's solid. Numbers look good." Walter nodded, saying everything necessary without speaking. Loretta asked if he was eating enough, the way she always had, and he assured her he was. The conversation moved easily between topics: work, family news, community happenings. No one performed anything. No one hid anything. The simple truth of family who had earned the right to be exactly who they were with each other. Early evening found him driving home with the windows down, the city moving around him in its ordinary rhythms. Traffic lights changed, people walked dogs, stores prepared to close. Nothing remarkable. And that itself felt remarkable. The steady pulse of a life that had found its proper shape again. He pulled into his driveway as the sun was setting. For a moment he sat in the car, engine off, listening to the quiet. Not from dread, not from hesitation, but from the full, clean awareness of what it meant to be exactly where he belonged. This house, this life, this version of himself that had emerged stronger and clearer from everything that tried to break him. He climbed out of the car, walked to his front door, and unlocked it. Inside, he secured the deadbolt and turned off the porch light. His footsteps echoed slightly as he moved toward the kitchen to begin another week. The sound of a man walking confidently through rooms that were entirely his own. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.